The American wilderness stretches across the continent like a living, breathing entity. Its ancient trees whispering secrets older than the nation itself, its rivers carving paths through stone, its shadows hiding things that defy the light of reason. For centuries, these forests have been both sanctuary and crucible, a place where the human spirit seeks solace or survival, often finding neither. But what if these woods hold more than beauty and danger? What if something primal, something unseen, watches from the underbrush, waiting for the moment you let your guard down? Welcome to Echoes of the Unseen, a documentary series by The Forbidden Excavation, where we unearth the chilling true stories of those who ventured into America's darkest forests and came face to face with nightmares that refuse to be explained. These are not mere legends or ghost stories spun to thrill around a campfire. These are the documented accounts of survivors, rangers, hikers, cryptid hunters, who encountered the unexplainable and lived to bear witness. Across 6 harrowing tales spanning 3 decades and 6 forests, the Appalachian Trail in Virginia, the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas, the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico, the Atchafalaya Basin in Louisiana, Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, and the Umatilla National Forest in Oregon, we explore encounters with creatures that defy science, silences that suffocate, and a primal fear that lingers like a scar. As you read or listen, ask yourself, could you face the darkness of these woods alone, knowing what might be lurking just beyond your sight? And more urgently, if the forest falls silent, would you recognize the moment to run for your life? Chapter 1, Appalachian Trail, Virginia, 1997, the rake's relentless pursuit. Lon Deo was never meant for the wild. At 32, he was a man of ink and paper, an editor whose world was bound by the 4 walls of a Richmond office, where the sharp click of a typewriter and the bitter aroma of black coffee were his constants. His days were spent hunched over manuscripts, glasses slipping down his nose, the faint hum of fluorescent lights his only soundtrack. Nature, to him, was a concept best left to poets and dreamers, until his older brother Garrett intervened. Garrett, 35, was Lan's opposite in every way. A burly electrician with a booming laugh and a romanticized love for the outdoors, inspired by Thoreau's musings on solitude. Since childhood, Lon had looked up to Garrett, the fearless sibling who climbed trees while Lon read beneath them, the one who'd once pulled him from a frozen pond during a reckless winter dare. So when Garrett proposed a bonding trip on the Appalachian Trail in Virginia, Lan's protests were feeble. "It'll be good for you," Garrett had insisted, his hand heavy on Lan's shoulder. "Nature's the best medicine for a weary soul." Lon, still reeling from a breakup and a bout of burnout, packed light, too light, he'd later realize, with just a sleeping bag, a change of clothes, and a dog-eared copy of Walden he'd never finish. They set out on a crisp spring morning in 1997, leaving behind a bustling trailhead town where the air smelled of gasoline and diner grease. The Appalachian Trail stretched before them, a ribbon of earth winding through dense stands of oak and hickory, their leaves filtering sunlight into shifting patches of gold and green that danced across the forest floor. Garrett was in his element, singing snippets of folk songs. "Oh Shenandoah, I long to see you," his voice echoing off the ridgelines while Lon trailed behind, his sneakers slipping on the uneven path. The first few hours were a study in sibling contrast. Garrett's boundless energy, pointing out a red-tailed hawk circling above, clashing with Lan's quiet resentment at the ache in his calves. But there was a fleeting moment of connection when they stopped to share a granola bar on a sun-warmed boulder, Garrett teasing Lon for being a city slicker, while Lon fired back, calling him a mountain man wannabe. For a brief second, they were kids again, laughing under the canopy's dappled light, the weight of adulthood momentarily lifted. By mid-afternoon, the trail steepened, winding along a ridge where the air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. They reached their planned campsite by dusk, a small clearing marked on Garrett's map, but the scene was unsettling. The fire ring was scattered, stones kicked apart as if in a frenzy. A cheap tent lay crumpled nearby, its nylon fabric torn and its poles snapped like kindling. A single hiking boot rested at the clearing's edge, laces still looped in a neat bow, but its pair was missing, as if the owner had vanished mid-step. Lan's stomach twisted, a cold unease settling in his chest. "This isn't right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We should find another spot." Garrett, ever the optimist, waved him off. "Probably just some careless campers who had a rough night. We're fine here." But Lon couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest's gaze heavy and unblinking. As night fell, they pitched their tent on a flat patch near the trail. The canopy above them a suffocating shroud of branches that seemed to lean inward, whispering secrets in a language Lon couldn't decipher. Garrett lit a small fire, its crackling a feeble protest against the forest's growing silence. No crickets chirped, no leaves rustled in the breeze. The absence of sound was a physical weight, pressing against Lan's ears until his own breathing sounded too loud, too exposed. He tried to focus on the fire's glow, the way the flames danced across the logs, but the shadows beyond the clearing stretched into shapes that didn't belong, elongated, jagged, alive. The first sign of trouble came with a distant snapping of branches, faint but deliberate, as if something heavy was moving through the underbrush. Lon froze, his spoonful of instant noodles halfway to his mouth. "Dear," Garrett muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. The sounds grew louder, more rhythmic, a steady thump-thump-thump that suggested bipedal movement. It wasn't the aimless rustling of wildlife. It was purposeful, circling just beyond the firelight, a predator staking its territory. Garrett grabbed the camp hatchet, its blade glinting in the fire's glow, and handed Lon the hunting knife they'd brought more for cutting rope than for defense. They sat back to back, scanning the darkness, the fire casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to writhe on their own, as if the forest itself was conspiring against them. Then a silhouette emerged from the trees, tall at least 7 feet, but hunched, its movements jerky and insect-like, as if its joints were strung together wrong. The firelight revealed a body that defied logic. Humanoid in shape, but its surface was hard and segmented, like a beetle's exoskeleton stretched over a frame too large to be natural. Its arms were impossibly long, dragging on the ground, ending in claws that flexed and twitched with a wet, clicking sound, as if they had a mind of their own. The head was the worst, elongated, with no discernible mouth or nose, just dark, sunken hollows where eyes should have been. It tilted its head, almost curious, as if studying them, its posture a grotesque mimicry of a bird watching prey. Garrett, his stubborn courage a shield against fear, shouted, "Back off!" and waved the hatchet. The creature moved faster than anything its size should have, closing the distance in seconds. It swiped at Garrett with one clawed hand, knocking him to the ground like a rag doll. The sound of ripping fabric and flesh was unmistakable, a wet tear that echoed in the still air. Lan's paralysis broke, and he lunged, driving the knife into what he thought was its neck. The blade met resistance, sinking in with a sickening crunch, as if piercing through layers of toughened leather. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, metallic wail that seemed to vibrate the air itself, and flung Lon aside, his body hitting the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. When Lon looked up, the creature was gone, retreated into the trees, leaving a trail of dark, viscous fluid that glistened in the firelight, its color an unnatural shade of black-green. Garrett lay still, his chest heaving shallowly, his shirt soaked in crimson. Deep gashes ran across his torso, the edges torn and jagged. Lon scrambled to him, pressing his hands against the wounds, blood seeping through his fingers. "Hold on, Garrett," he said, his voice cracking. "I'll get help. Just hold on." He grabbed the flashlight, its beam shaking in his trembling hands, and ran back toward a group of campers they'd passed earlier that day. Every step felt like an eternity, the forest silence now a deafening roar in his ears, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig that made him whip around, expecting the creature to be right behind him. He stumbled into the camper's sight, a small fire casting a warm glow over 3 tents. Lon must have looked like a madman, his clothes torn, hands stained with his brother's blood, babbling about an attack. A burly man named Vince, his beard streaked with gray, grabbed a medkit, while another camper, a woman with a practical air, helped fashion a stretcher from tent poles and a sleeping bag. They carried Garrett back to a ranger station just before dawn. The journey agonizingly slow, every rustle in the trees making Lan's heart leap into his throat. Garrett was airlifted to a hospital, where he survived, though his recovery would stretch into months of physical therapy and nightmares that woke him screaming. Lon couldn't let it go. Months later, he sat in a dimly lit library in Richmond, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and local histories, searching for answers. In a 1973 edition of a small-town paper, he found a story about a hiker named Albin Rowley, who'd survived a similar encounter on the same stretch of trail. Albin described a creature he called the rake, a predator neither spirit nor beast, a relic of prehistory or a punishment for venturing too far into the wild. The article dismissed him as a crackpot, but its final line stuck with Lon. Some locals believe the entity is a guardian of the forest. Others say it's a curse on those who disturb its domain. Lon never hiked again, but the rake's shadow lingered in his dreams, a reminder that some places are not meant for human footsteps. Chapter 2, Ouachita National Forest, Arkansas, 1993, The Clicking Predator. Clyde Haskins was a man who thrived on order. At 42, he'd been a park ranger in the Ouachita National Forest for nearly a decade, finding solace in the small rituals of his job. A neatly stacked pile of paperwork, a trail cleared of debris, a thermos of black coffee sipped at dawn while the forest woke around him. The Ouachita, with its towering pines and trickling creeks, was his sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the world, divorce, debts, the noise of cities, couldn't touch him. Raised in a small Arkansas town, Clyde had grown up fishing in the creeks and hunting deer with his father, a quiet man who taught him to respect the land. But on a humid morning in 1993, that sanctuary turned against him. Clyde was dispatched to a backcountry site near Cedar Lake after a camper, Michael Carter, reported strange noises and disturbed ground. Michael, a wiry man in his 20s with a nervous tic, had been curt over the radio, muttering, "I'm not paid enough to deal with this," before hightailing it back to civilization. Clyde didn't think much of it. Tourists often spooked themselves in the wilderness, but protocol demanded he investigate. He drove his ranger truck down a dirt road, the low hum of the engine breaking the forest's quiet, tires kicking up dust that hung in the still air like a shroud. Stepping out at the site, Clyde felt the air shift, a heaviness settling over him like a damp blanket. The campsite was abandoned, a tent collapsed on one side, its stakes pulled from the ground as if in a hurry. A half-buried log smoldered in the fire pit, the scent of charred wood mingling with the piney tang of the forest. What caught Clyde's eye were the footprints, too wide and long for human boots, with claw marks at the tips, suggesting something had bounded through with deliberate, powerful strides. They reminded him of a kangaroo's tracks, but these were larger, heavier, and the claw marks were deep, gouging the earth like a blade. Curiosity, that stubborn ranger's instinct, urged him to follow them, despite the voice in his head whispering that this was a bad idea. The trail led him half a mile deeper into the forest, the canopy above growing denser, filtering the sunlight into a dim, greenish haze. Pine needles carpeted the ground, muffling his steps, but the silence was unnerving. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered, just an oppressive stillness that seemed to press against his ears. Then he found the first body, or what was left of it. The corpse was torn apart in a way that didn't make sense. Precise, almost surgical. The man's torso was shredded, ribs exposed, but there wasn't much blood around, as if it had been drained or taken. Clyde had seen wildlife accidents before. A cougar attack once left a hiker looking like he'd gone through a meat grinder, but this was different. He reached for his radio to call it in, but the only response was static, the signal dead in the dense woods. He backtracked toward the truck, hand on the handle of his knife. Not much, but better than nothing. That's when he heard it. A clicking sound, faint but rhythmic, too mechanical to be an animal, too deliberate to be human. He froze, scanning the trees. A glimpse of movement caught his eye. Something tall, maybe 7 feet or more, hunched forward like it was sniffing the ground. Its skin was mottled, almost like a hairless dog's, but stretched over a wiry frame, its limbs unnaturally long, spider-like in their proportions. Its face was close, too close, when he finally saw it clearly. Rows of jagged, uneven teeth, yellowed and cracked, set in a mouth that seemed to split its head in half. The clicking wasn't coming from its throat. It was the claws on its hands, tapping against each other as it moved, a predator's idle habit. Clyde backed away, slow and steady, trying not to breathe too loud, but the creature stopped and tilted its head, as if it had noticed him. He bolted, survival instincts overriding pride. Branches snapped behind him, the clicking growing louder, faster. The truck was still 100 yards away when something hard and cold hit him from behind, knocking him flat. Claws dug into his back, pinning him to the ground. He twisted his head enough to see its face, the smell of rotting meat overwhelming, its teeth inches from his neck. In a desperate move, he jabbed at it with his knife, catching its arm. The creature let out a sound, a hiss mixed with a whistle, and recoiled, giving him a second to scramble free. He made it to the truck, slammed the door, and fumbled with the keys, his hands slick with sweat and blood. The creature slammed into the side, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Clyde floored it, kicking up gravel as he tore down the road. In the rearview mirror, he saw it standing there, watching, before it turned and loped back into the woods. When he reached the ranger station, Michael's car was still parked outside, but the main office was in shambles. Chairs overturned, papers scattered, blood pooling on the floor. Near the supply closet, he found Michael's body, his wounds mirroring the corpse in the woods. Precise, drained, unnatural. Clyde grabbed the station's shotgun, locked himself in the supply room, and stayed there until sunrise, listening to the sounds outside. At one point, he heard the clicking again, but it never came inside. When daylight broke, he ventured out. The truck was scratched to hell, but the creature was gone. Back in town, he went straight to the sheriff, showing him the bodies, the truck, the gouges in the metal. The official report called it a bear attack, convenient but wrong. Bears don't click, and they don't leave footprints like those. For weeks, Clyde heard whispers of other sightings, people going missing. He quit a month later, unable to shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't done. The Washita had once been his refuge. Now it was a place of shadows he'd never return to. Chapter 3, Gila Wilderness, New Mexico, 1996. The Stalker in the Shadows. Victor Amsler had always been a loner, the kind of man who valued silence over small talk, who found comfort in the hum of his own thoughts. At 38, he was newly unemployed, a victim of corporate downsizing at a factory in Albuquerque, and nursing the sting of a life that hadn't turned out as planned. Friends were few, real ones, not the kind who remembered his birthday because their phone reminded them. So when he decided to break away from everything in 1996, the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico seemed the perfect escape. Camping was something he'd always wanted to try, a chance to reset after the chaos of the past year. He bought a tent, a survival knife more ornamental than practical, and a few books on wilderness survival, hoping a week alone would bring the clarity he craved. He parked his Jeep at the trailhead under a blistering midday sun, the dusty lot baking in the heat. A ranger warned him not to stray too far from the marked trails and to report back after a couple of days. Victor waved him off, eager to get started, though he'd later wish he'd paid more attention to the ranger's hesitant expression, as if the man wanted to say more but didn't. The first few miles were breathtaking. Towering ponderosa pines swayed in the warm breeze, their needles carpeting the ground, the air sharp with the scent of pine and earth. Victor felt a rare sense of peace, the kind he hadn't known since childhood, when he'd spend hours exploring the arroyos near his family's home. He pitched his tent by a river as dusk rolled in, the sound of running water lulling him to sleep. That first night, he woke to a strange rustling outside his tent, heavy, deliberate footsteps circling his camp, stopping every so often as if listening. He gripped his knife, heart pounding, telling himself it was a deer, but the sound was too rhythmic, too intentional. Morning revealed faint impressions in the dirt, paw prints, but longer and deeper, as if something walked on its toes, its weight pressing into the earth. He decided not to dwell on it, chalking it up to an overactive imagination, and ventured farther into the wilderness on the second day. The terrain grew rockier, the trees closer together, the trails harder to follow. Around noon, he stumbled upon an old campsite, rusted lantern hanging from a low branch, scraps of rotted fabric half buried in the dirt, and claw marks on a nearby tree, deep and parallel, far higher than any animal could reach. That night, the unease returned. Victor built a fire and sat with his back to it, hoping the light would keep whatever was out there at bay. A smell hit him first, wet dog mixed with spoiled meat, faint but growing stronger. The fire snapped, sending embers into the air, and in the flickering light, he saw movement between the trees, a tall, hunched shape darting out of sight. He shouted, trying to scare it off, but the forest fell silent. No insects, no wind, just a heavy stillness. Sleep was impossible, every scratch on bark, every low rumble of movement keeping him on edge. By morning, his nerves were shot. He broke camp early, deciding to cut his trip short, the wilderness no longer therapeutic but suffocating. Heading back toward the trailhead, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The deliberate footsteps returned, matching his pace, always just far enough behind to make him question his sanity. The smell came back, rancid and thick, and in the fading light, he saw it. It stood between the trees, tall, its limbs too long and thin for its body, its head wolf-like but wrong, muzzle short, jaw hanging unnaturally low, skin patchy and raw, scraped down to muscle. Its claws clicked softly as it swayed, testing the ground with each step. Victor bolted, branches whipping at his face, rocks turning underfoot. He tripped, his flashlight rolling away, its beam dancing over the trees. When he looked up, the creature was there, not 20 feet away, crouched low, sniffing the air, its head tilted with a chilling curiosity. Desperate, Victor grabbed a jagged rock and threw it as hard as he could. The creature's head snapped to the side, following the rock as it disappeared into the dark. He scrambled to his feet and ran, following the flashlight's beam until he reached the parking lot. His Jeep was untouched, and he locked himself inside, chest heaving, staring into the woods. The smell lingered, faint but present. He drove to the nearest town, pulling into a diner's parking lot to call the authorities. The sheriff and deputies found the trashed ranger station. Papers scattered, a map with deep scratches, a severed radio cord, but no creature. Later, a hiker went missing in the same area, his body found strung up in a tree near the old campsite, markings on his remains matching nothing native to the Gila. Victor never camped again, the wilderness now a place of terror, not solace. Chapter 4. Atchafalaya Basin, Louisiana, 1987. The swamp's hungry shadows. Nathaniel Price, or Nate to those who knew him, had a job that raised eyebrows. Cryptid hunter. In 1987, at 35, he was used to the skepticism, the snickers at parties when he explained what he did. But for Nate, it wasn't about pride. It was about answers, about chasing the unexplainable in places others avoided. That July, he found himself in the Atchafalaya Basin, Louisiana, hired by a local woman named Leonard Doder. Leonard was convinced something unnatural was attacking her livestock. Chickens shredded, cows missing chunks of flesh, bones left like forgotten debris. She'd heard strange noises at night, a cross between a hyena and something underwater, and her husband had vanished 2 weeks earlier. She didn't want the police. She wanted someone who'd seen claw marks that couldn't be explained. The swamp was a world unto itself, the air thick with humidity, the smell of stagnant water clinging to everything. Cypress trees draped in Spanish moss loomed overhead, their gnarled roots twisting into the muck. Nate trudged through the swamp with a flashlight, a notebook, and a borrowed shotgun, his boots squelching with each step. At the first sight, a clearing where Leonard's chicken coop once stood, he found wooden planks splintered like matchsticks, feathers plastered to the mud, and tracks. Three-toed, clawed, too large for any known predator, sinking deep into the wet earth. A rustling behind him revealed a raccoon, or its remains, eviscerated, its insides scattered, the kill fresh and cruel. Then he heard a clicking sound, sharp and irregular, like insects tapping on glass, but louder, closer. The next sight was worse. A cow, its hide flayed, teeth marks jagged along the rib cage, the same tracks circling the remains. Nate found a snapped claw, glossy black and curved, which he pocketed. A scream, not human, not animal, came from deeper in the swamp, leading him to a small island with a wooden shack. Inside, the air reeked of rancid meat and urine, piles of bones, some animal, some human. Scattered across the floor, skulls crushed, bite marks gouged into the bone. Then he saw it. 7 feet tall, hunched, its skin scaly and slick like a catfish, legs bird-like with 3-clawed toes, arms ending in hooked talons, head flat like a hammerhead shark, rows of jagged teeth protruding from its mouth. It charged, and Nate fired, the shotgun's recoil nearly knocking him back. The creature faltered, a gaping wound in its chest, but didn't stop. A second shot to the head brought it down, dark fluid pooling beneath it. But relief was short-lived. More hisses came from behind the shack, 6 more creatures emerging, their slick bodies glinting in the moonlight. Nate ran, the swamp a blur of branches and splashing water, the creature's footsteps pounding behind him. He reached Leonard's house, barricading himself inside with her. But the creatures surrounded them, their claws scraping the walls, toying with their prey. One broke through the bedroom door, and Nate fired, Leonard slashing another with a butcher knife. They escaped through a window, fleeing to a hunting cabin where they held out until dawn. The creatures were gone, but Leonard's husband's remains were among the bones in the shack. Nate left Louisiana, a claw in his pocket, questions unanswered. The swamp kept its secrets, waiting for the next fool to venture too far. Chapter 5. Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming, 2017. The Silent Hunters. Travis Redfield, 33, had always felt at home in the outdoors, a love born from a childhood in Idaho climbing rocks and fishing in rivers. Yellowstone was his backyard, a place of solace after a recent divorce in 2017. This wasn't an ordinary hike. He'd planned a solo trek deep into the wilderness, far from tourists, to camp overnight. He carried the essentials: water, dried food, a tent, and a small handgun, a habit from growing up in wild country. The first few miles were serene, damp earth underfoot, the rustle of leaves overhead, until he crossed paths with another hiker, Paul, a man in his 40s who mentioned camping at a ridge 5 miles ahead. By late afternoon, clouds gathered, casting shadows over the dense forest. Travis set up camp near a clearing by a creek, the sound of water masking the wind. But something was off. A strange absence of sound. No birds or insects, just an eerie stillness. Around 2 a.m., he woke to heavy, deliberate footsteps circling his tent, his hand reaching for the gun. The footsteps retreated, but morning revealed tracks in the mud. Almost human, but wrong, with long toes, narrow heels, and faint claw marks. Travis packed up, intent on finding Paul. He reached Paul's camp by mid-morning, finding it shredded, gear scattered, the ground stained dark, a piece of Paul's jacket tangled with coarse, unfamiliar fur. A low, rhythmic thumping sounded in the distance, and Travis crouched, peering through the trees. A 7-foot figure emerged, covered in matted fur, its gait unsettlingly human-like, limbs elongated, torso narrow, hands with bony fingers tipped with jagged claws. It rummaged through Paul's gear, snorting gutturally. Travis backed away, then ran, the trail endless, every step heavier. A scream, not human, too primal, echoed through the valley, and he kept moving, stumbling upon an abandoned ranger station. Inside, he barricaded himself, finding a flare gun and flares. At dusk, 2 creatures returned, dragging Paul's mutilated body, tearing into him with horrifying precision. As they slammed against the door, Travis fired the flare gun, the bright red glow driving them back. He escaped through a back window, running until dawn, when he reached the main trail and flagged down hikers who called for help. Rangers found Paul's camp disturbingly clean. No bodies, just scattered gear. But deep claw marks and unfamiliar fur confirmed Travis's story. Old reports spoke of creatures in the area, Skinwalkers, feral mutations. Beings that hunted in silence, leaving only terror. Travis never returned to Yellowstone, the wilderness now a place of dread. Chapter 6. Umatilla National Forest, Oregon, 1994, The Bone Collectors. Travis Kincaid, 45, had spent most of his adult life with the Forest Service in the Umatilla National Forest, a sprawling wilderness in northeastern Oregon. After a messy divorce and mounting debts, the solitude of the forest was his escape, a place where he could catalog wildlife and maintain trails without the noise of human drama. In 1994, he was tasked with surveying an uncharted part near Rattlesnake Creek for potential hazards. Down trees, erosion, the usual, before new hiking trails could be approved. Alone, as budget cuts often demanded, he set out, the towering pines and moss-covered rocks a familiar comfort. Around noon, he stopped to eat a peanut butter sandwich, scanning the terrain, when he noticed something strange. The forest floor littered with bones, some animal, others disturbingly human, partially buried as if someone or something had tried to conceal them. The air shifted, the usual forest sounds vanishing, replaced by an oppressive silence, even the creek's gurgling muted. Then he saw it, a creature, standing on two legs, hunched, its fur patchy, revealing gray, leathery skin, its head elongated, canine-like, jaw hinging open unnaturally wide. Two more emerged, their forms equally grotesque, circling him like predators, one clutching a human femur. Travis fired a warning shot into the air, then at the ground near their feet, the shots agitating them but buying him a moment to run. He crashed through the underbrush, the creatures in pursuit, their footsteps impossibly fast. He dove into Rattlesnake Creek, the icy water numbing his senses, the current carrying him downstream as the creatures paced the shore, unwilling to enter the water. Miles downstream, he climbed onto the bank, battered but alive, and made it to the ranger station before nightfall. A search party found deep gouges in the trees near the creek, but the bones and creatures were gone. A week later, more human bones were found in another part of the forest, scattered and partially buried. Travis quit the Forest Service, the woods no longer a refuge but a graveyard of secrets, waiting for the next soul to wander too far. These stories, spanning decades and landscapes, share a chilling thread. The wilderness is not as empty as it seems. From the rake's pursuit in Virginia to the bone collectors of Oregon, survivors describe creatures that defy science. Beings that hunt with intelligence, that thrive in silence, that leave behind claw marks and tracks as their only calling cards. Local legends whisper of guardians, curses, predators from forgotten times, but the truth remains elusive. The forbidden excavation continues to dig, to listen, to document. Because somewhere out there, in the shadows of America's darkest forests, the unseen still waits. Will you be the next to hear its whisper?